Shut up, compressor. Hey everyone, I'm Matt with Doogs Models, and this is the Flankoff. I like that one. That'll work. So I intended to film all the fun of painting and detailing and weathering the cockpits, and I kind of didn't do it. So before I knew what was happening, I was already gluing things into the fuselage, and here we are with the cockpits installed into the two Su-35 kits. Over here on this side, in the sort of gray beige plastic, we have the Kitty Hawk kit. Over here in the cooler gray, we have the Great Wall kit. Now, first I want to talk about some of the accuracy questions that are swirling around the sills and the cockpit decking, and then we'll move and we'll start looking at these individually. So what's the deal with the cockpit decking? Well, it's really hard to get good, what I would call walk-around style photos of the Su-35's cockpit area. You don't have the typical stuff you see with, you know, pretty much everything else where somebody at an air show or at a, you know, Air Force base climbs up the boarding ladder and takes a whole bunch of pictures of all the stuff around here. That doesn't really seem to be a thing with the 35, at least not yet. I'm sure Russia probably is putting the kibosh on that to an extent. So what we're left with are either, you know, displays in various places of maybe questionable authenticity, or cockpit shots that might show a glimpse of a sill here or there, but it's tough to really get a sense of scale on anything. Or we're left with shots from the ground using a long lens that show, you know, like a pilot boarding or whatnot. And the trouble with those is they're shot from a long way away using a lens. You know, when you use a long focal length lens, it tends to basically kind of scrunch detail, so it makes it more squat from a front to back perspective, which can make things look fatter than they are, essentially. So it's tough to really judge shape and size accurately with, you know, a long lens, depending on what that focal length is. It's also tough to get a real sense of what's happening from those shallow angles, just because, you know, it's one thing to look at these top down. Imagine if you're looking at it like that. Like, how do you judge what the hell is going on here? It's tough. So I think that lack of references might also be behind why these literally look like two different subjects. So which one is right? Honestly, I don't know. To me, the Kitty Hawk sills look very wide. Now, granted, the Su-35 seems to have, you know, sills of a certain width, but they do not seem quite this wide. However, they do seem wider than what Great Wall has going on. So I think probably the truth lies somewhere in between these two kits. So that's the first thing, is just the sidewall shape. In terms of the combing shape, it's really tough to tell, again, based on the shots we have. Now, we have some that look sort of side on into the cockpit, but you've got the windscreen in the way and all that. It's tough to really see the shapes accurately. I feel like the ones I've seen, the Great Wall seems to have, with a slightly shallower profile to the combing, it seems to maybe fit a little bit better. But again, it's tough to say for certain with the shots that seem to be available. Now, what else have we got to look at in here? We also have this rear combing element that kind of comes along the back of the ejection seat, this little raised area with these shoulders that sort of come around and blend into, on the actual Su-35, a very small, subtle lip on the inside of the cockpit sills. The Great Wall kit has that. The Kitty Hawk kit does not. These sills, aside from the canopy hooks, are completely blank. Granted, that's not that tough of a thing to add if you're motivated, so you could very easily come in here and extend the shoulders of the sill, or of the combing back here, into that sort of lip. But it's not there to begin with. In terms of the lip itself, I think that this Kitty Hawk one is overly prominent. Compared to what you see in photos, this thing is rather tall, rather thick, and again, it should be blending into a lip, not just kind of ending right here the way this one does. The the Great Wall kit, I think, does a better job of it. As you can see, it has a nice sort of come down into that little sill ridge. The only thing is, I think, again, based on reference photos and what we can tell, this might want to be a little bit higher. So the only other things that I would bring up, because it's really hard to see back in here, this seems pretty cool looking with the little rivets and the little wiring and whatnot. That's not present on the Kitty Hawk, but who can say, right? The only other thing I would mention here are the canopy hooks, which you can see all along the sill, extending back here towards where the canopy hinge will go. Now these are very fine and delicate on the Great Wall kit, but they're still there and they're still nice looking. They're definitely more prominent on the Kitty Hawk job. As you can see here, when you turn to the side, they show up pretty nicely, but honestly, compared to the real thing, they would still need quite a bit of more prominence to really show up, because the real thing has these little hooks that kind of come up and go back. And so if you were really going to be maniacal about recreating an Su-35, you would want to literally scrape these off and start fresh. I'm sure there's probably photo etch or something out there that does exactly that. So that's that for the decking and the accuracy side of things. So now let's look at the cockpits themselves and the engineering and how it all goes together. So the Great Wall cockpit, as we've already talked about, is a very nice, essentially one piece of fare. As you can see down here, I don't know why I think the combination of Tamiya extra thin and super glue turns white. But basically, to mount the cockpit into the fuselage, you have 4 posts. You have one here, and then you've got 2 up here. You can see where they plug in right in that area. And those hold it damn securely. It's not going anywhere. So kudos to Great Wall for doing a great job with making this the most hassle-free cockpit installation probably possible on an aircraft of this design. Now we flip it around here. The decking piece is a separate piece that just drops into this area of the fuselage, and it's about as nice a drop fit as you can have on something. You know, when I think about these different curves and everything it has to manage, that's a really nice job. Now the cockpit itself, you can see here the really excellent clear decal or clear background stencil decals that it has for the side consoles. These things are phenomenal looking, and I realize there may be some slight glare catching going on with these overhead lights that doesn't quite do it justice, but yeah, seeing this in person, it really shines. It's something I think, honestly, if all manufacturers could pull off this level of detail and delicacy in these various stencils, I would love to see this for every modern aircraft, because it's that impressive. Up here you can see the multifunction displays and the control stick and all that up front. The MFDs themselves on this one I literally just colored them in with a black pen because I didn't want to fuck around with getting a nice glossy shine on them at this point. And I sure as hell didn't want to use the decals, because I hate decals of MFDs that are powered on when the plane is sitting on the ground with the canopy up and nobody in it. So that's that. What else happened in here? So this was painted in Mr. Paint's Sukhoi cockpit blue-gray, which seems close enough. Depending on the photos you look at, it seems like it might be too light. But again, it varies depending on the photos you look at. We've also got the green laid into the footwells in there. And then we've got, of course, the K-36. I think this plastic pad and belt insert is nice. I think it could have been nicer. So, if you look down here, the seat belts don't really have harnesses at the bottom, or they don't really have buckles at the bottom. They just kind of are there. The padding, I think, could use a little bit more definition. I would still basically recommend, if you want to go crazy or just go moderately crazy, replace this with a resin K36. But by all means, steal the stencil decals because they're pretty awesome. That is that. The only other stuff that is going to be going into this is right here. You can see these little plug holes up on the deck and then down on the side console in here. Those, I believe, are for the canopy heaters. If you look at the way the canopy is designed, these things come up here, canopy closes on top, and it looks like the holes match up, and they feed air to shut-up compressor to pipes along the canopy to probably keep it from fogging. So that's that. Anyway, overall, very pleased with this for a stock cockpit, especially the way that Kitty Hawk really pays off the detail they put into the consoles with those clear-backed stencils. Okay, let's move on to Kitty Hawk's cockpit. Now, where the Great Wall kit essentially has a one-piece cockpit tub, Kitty Hawk does not. As we have discovered before, their cockpit is essentially a tongue and groove affair all around the board. So you have side, cockpit floor, rear bulkhead, forward bulkhead, and they're all flat pieces and they all kind of link together. Now, I will say they do link together, which is more than can be said with some previous Kitty Hawk releases, but it's still a little bit more of a hassle than, the nice one-piece tub kind of thing. Then up here you can see where the side console pieces kind of slot in. So, that gap I was worried about early on is nowhere near as big an issue once you get paint and panel washes and all that kind of stuff going on in there. So, yay. Anyway, as far as installing this, you don't have anything like mounting posts. You have basically what is a little lip back here. And it's funny because the lip is actually deeper than this thing is. This thing sits on like a shallower sublip of the lip. And then up here, you've got essentially the main trunk for the HUD display. There's a little, it's hard to see around the fogged up CA right here. This is a result of me putting on to me extra thin and then saying, fuck it, let's put down some CA as well, and then it just turns white. But there's a little notch in here where this trunk sort of fits into. And those are the two mounting points. That's it. And the fun thing with that is when we turn this around, as you can see, that mount depends on this HUD trunking fitting the way it does. And you also have to contend with that also mounting the instrument panel to it. So, and the instrument panel basically kind of sits on it. There's nothing in terms of positive fit about it. Now, that's not to say it's unbuildable or a burning pile of trash. It's definitely buildable. You do have to deal with some flash and some whatnot in here. It's a pain in the ass. It seems unnecessary, but it's not by any means insurmountable or even all that much of a challenge. Just annoying. The rest of the cockpit fits, as you can see, pretty well. The seat and the ejection rail work nicely. The sidewalls, everything seems to come together. I will say that if you get at an extreme angle here, you can see where the Great Wall kit provides the actual upper sidewalls and their sort of canvas covering and whatnot. This one is blank, and there's just a gap of nothingness in here. Granted, most of your shots are not going to be detail shots from this angle. They'll be like this, or up here. On this one, I opted not to paint the foot, the foot areas green because I'm lazy, and fuck it. And yeah, so that's that. As you can see, the seat arrangement definitely looks significantly different with the photo etch belts and the lack of guidance that has been mentioned before. And so that is where we are at. Now, in terms of which one of these I prefer, I will say that I definitely think that the Great Wall kit has the edge in terms of enjoyment of building. And I would say overall in terms of detail and finesse as well. Now, in terms of accuracy, With the cockpit sill issue, it's a bit of a toss-up. I definitely think that what we've got going on with there it is. I definitely think what we've got going on here with the sort of shoulders and the lip along the cockpit sill is definitely pointing in Great Wall's favor. But the sills themselves do seem a slight bit too narrow. Granted, on the Kitty Hawk side, these seem too fat. Again, I think the truth lies somewhere in between these. You know, if you reduce this by 50%, if you increase this by 50%, everything would be hunky-dory. I feel like this shoulder thing back here is crudely done on the Kitty Hawk kit and honestly feels a bit like an afterthought. Like, oh shit, we forgot to put that on. The rest of this is all flat. There it is. This one feels much more organic to what's happening around it. I realize that's not, there's nothing quantitative about that. It's just a sense I have. And then in terms of the rear bulkhead detail, I don't miss much of it here, especially when you consider you're going to have those heater pieces, which are very evident in reference photos, connecting from the upper deck down to the side console. Also note, those are not present on the Kitty Hawk. So that is another mark in terms of accuracy on the Great Wall side of things. So overall, I would say Great Wall is definitely leading the pack, but there are still some questions about who's right in terms of accuracy. So with that, let's get on with building more of these and see where the Flankoff takes us.